Well, hello, Northway. Welcome on this Palm Sunday weekend. Glad you're here in Wexford and Dormont at our East End campus, Oakland, and in Sewickley Valley. So a couple of months ago, I had a good opportunity with my family. We got to go out, all five of us, to our favorite restaurant. Got a good night out. We had a fantastic gift card someone gave us, and so we were going to go out and live it up a little bit, right? We're going to have a little bit of fun. And so we got there, and you know how a night is going just incredibly well? The kids are behaving. Everybody looks good. It feels good. We got a table right away, and things were just so perfect. And so the waitress came by, and my daughter had to use the restroom, so my wife and her, they got up, and they started to leave. And I said, hey, do you want some appetizers tonight? Because we had a gift card, right? So live it up, right? Appetizers on me, right? And so my wife looks at me and she goes, yeah. I said, well, what do you want? She goes, surprise me. And so I'm like, all right, I'm up to the task tonight. It's a good night. We're feeling good. And so she leaves with my daughter. I look at my kids, my boys. We make the order. And then, like 5 minutes later, they come back. And just as my wife and daughter are coming back, the waitress brings the appetizers. And my wife and daughter, I get out. They slide in the booth, right? And the waitress sets down the appetizers. And all of a sudden, I could feel things change. Like November-ish when the weather starts to change. There's no snow yet, but winter is coming. The atmosphere sort of changed. And I looked over at my wife and I'm like, is everything all right? Did I do something wrong? And she looks at me and she goes, you didn't get the hummus. And in my mind, I'm racking my brains, right? The hummus, I'm pretty sure she said, surprise me. I'm pretty sure I heard that. I don't normally remember things, but this one I think I got for sure. And so me, out of my big mouth, I look at her and I say, well, I thought you said to surprise you. And she goes, I thought you'd get what I expected. I went and did some research this week and I looked up the word surprise me in the ancient texts, right? In the Greek and the Hebrew. And what it means in a marriage context, surprise me actually means read my mind. You should know what I want, right? So fellas, if you ever hear that phrase, surprise me, phone a friend, right? Call a timeout, do whatever you can, ask her to use it in a sentence because it's a trap. See, the truth is, none of us really like surprises, do we? We'd rather just have our expectations met, wouldn't we? When you think about it, expectations in life, they're a pretty funny thing. We all have them. They apply in every area of our life. Seldom do we clearly express what we expect, and when we don't get them, we get really, really disappointed, don't we? I think about expectations like this. They're pictures we have in our mind. We sort of have a picture of how life should be. And then we sort of frame it up and we look at it. And as we go through life, whatever season you're in, whatever stage of life you're in, we compare life, reality, with our pictures. We have expectations all across the board. And if you're like me, in my house, once a picture gets framed, it never comes down. It's sort of like a forever thing. Expectations when you graduate high school or college of what independence is going to look like. Expectation of your wedding day or of marriage and a spouse and how this whole thing is going to play out and what living together is going to look like. Expectations of your boss. Expectations of a household, of an income, of a career, of our vacations. Expectations of how our kids will turn out. I remember when I was 16 years old, I had expectations. I got my driver's license. I was cool. I finally had a measure now of independence, right? I came home one weekend. I was away on a trip. I came home and my dad took me out in the garage and he had something to show me. He showed me my very first car. And in my mind, my expectation was a Ford Mustang. I had a thing for Ford Mustangs. Or, second choice was a Jeep Wrangler, right? I loved them. I thought top down in the summer, I'd be really, really cool. But this is what I saw when I came to the garage. Yeah, my friends called it the Baywatch rescue vehicle. That puppy got 8 miles to the gallon, and I had to pay for gas when I was 16, right? I remember, the oh, wow on my face wasn't the oh, wow my parents were expecting in that moment, right? And I get it. I know what you're thinking. Those are first world problems, aren't they? You got a car when you were 16, right? This is sometimes what expectations are like. They're like when the cookie is too big for the glass of milk. Like, what am I going to do? But the reality is, no matter the expectation, when it isn't met, we get a little disappointed. We get a little depressed the longer it goes. Sometimes we even get a little bit desperate, and if it goes on too long, we can even become destructive. Expectations are a funny, powerful force. So when's the last time you took a look or an inventory of your expectations? Like the picture you have for your wife, the picture you have of a future wife or a future husband, the picture you have for your current husband or your kids or your boss or your work. And what about your picture of God? When's the last time you took a look at what you expect from God? You know, we're in this series studying the book of Mark. And what we've been doing is we've been tracking along for these last 4 weeks about the religious leaders and how they viewed Jesus and how Jesus interacted with them and what that means for all of our lives. And really what we've been saying each week and each week and each week is that the reality is that you and I, me included, we're all a little bit like the religious leaders. You see, as it turns out, they didn't care for surprises either. They had expectations that they wanted met. In the book of Mark, after Palm Sunday and after Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, there's a scene that unfolds just before his death and his conviction and sentence to death. It's known as a trial moment. It's the moment in front of the high council. And this is a moment where the expectations of those religious leaders, the most educated, the wealthy, the elite, the people who were supposed to be spiritually mature, this is a moment where their expectations really come to the forefront. Here's what it says in Mark chapter 14, verse 53. And they led Jesus to the high priest. And all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. Now, as you know right there, this is like the middle of the night, right? And I don't imagine the religious leaders to be a group of night owls, right? But this is the middle of the night and they're all hanging out at the high priest's house, meaning it's a setup. This was planned. This was the trap that they finally got Jesus to be caught in. It goes on in verse 54, and Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now, the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about this, their testimony did not agree. See, here's what you got to know about what's going on right now. In the book of Numbers, in the Old Testament, and in the book of Deuteronomy, what just took place should have ended the trial right there. Because according to Jewish law tradition, to get a conviction, you had to have 2 witnesses agree, meaning their testimony had to match up identically. They didn't have this with Jesus, but all of a sudden, somehow, some way, the trial continued. See, isn't it funny how desperate and destructive we get when we want something badly? And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he, referring to Jesus, he remained silent and made no answer. This is your, a few good men moment right there, right? My grandfather used to call it a few very good men. I don't know why he called that movie that, but I think about that. This is the dramatic court scene, right? This is the moment where the high priest gets up and he approaches the witness. And again, this is not the way it's supposed to work. The high priest is really the person who's supposed to speak last. He's supposed to only, really render a judgment if they can't come to a conclusion. But he gets up out of his seat of honor and he approaches the witness because he didn't get what he wanted from the witnesses, so he's going to get what he needs from Jesus himself. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments, and he said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and cover his face and strike him. saying, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. It got pretty violent, didn't it? And yet all of this, again, was against Jewish law, because no one could incriminate themselves for a death sentence according to the law. You also couldn't get a conviction and a sentencing on the same day and the same time, right? But all of this stuff didn't matter. So do you see what's unfolding here? The chief priests and all the religious leaders, the ones who were supposed to enforce and protect and watch over the law, were the very ones who were bending and breaking it to get what they wanted. Here they were, driven crazy by Jesus, right? All throughout the book of Mark, as we've studied for the last 4 weeks, Jesus sort of just drove them crazy. And what drove them the most crazy, whenever he would say that he was God. Because they had a different picture in their mind of what the Messiah was supposed to look like, right? Do you ever wonder how they missed it? Do you ever stop and think about that? They're the most educated. They knew the law. They knew the scriptures. They're the ones that should have been shouting and pointing the way and telling everybody, this is the one, but they didn't do that, right? Here was a guy in front of them who did amazing miracles. Miracles that required some power from another level, from heaven, right? Here was a man in Jesus who could engage all of society. He could engage and draw in the poor and the lowest of the low. And he could engage and hang with and be on the same level of the wealthy and the educated. Here was a man who could answer any single riddle with truth and wisdom and grace. And they missed him. You see, there are devastating consequences when we are so grossly focused on our expectations. They sentenced him to death because what they pictured was a human being who was a political leader. Somebody that wouldn't threaten their lifestyle or their position. Somebody that would secure their wealth and secure their status. Somebody who was military-minded, politically minded, a judge who would sit and render all these decisions. And this is what Jesus did not match up to their expectations. So they sentenced him to death. You see, our expectations in all of life, if they go unchecked, the consequences can be devastating. And this is especially true when it comes to our picture of God. So I ask again, when's the last time you took a look at your picture of God and what you expect from him? You know, when you think about it in our lives, there's a difference between desires and expectations. I mean, it's one thing to desire something, right? And it's a whole other thing to expect it. I mean, think about this. If you desire something to happen and it comes true, let's say you desire to get promoted. Let's say you desire to get an increase in your salary, or you desire to meet someone and go off and get married, and it actually comes true. You're a pretty joyful person, aren't you? You're also a pretty thankful person in those moments, because when we have desires and they get fulfilled, we are matched with joy and gratitude. But when you expect those things, when you expect your wife to cook dinner every night, when you expect your husband to do this list of chores every single day, when it's an expectation and it happens, you're very different, aren't you? You're more like, it's about time. You're supposed to. Why would I reward you? Desires and expectations are two very different things. When you desire something to happen and you're hopeful that it will happen and it doesn't happen, you stay hopeful, don't you? You keep dreaming, you keep moving forward. But when you expect something to happen, when you have a picture in your mind of how life is really going to work out, and you've already determined and it's framed and you know it's going to happen and it doesn't happen, that's when the cycle and spiral begins. With disappointment, depression, discouragement, desperation, and then destructiveness. The line between desires and expectation is very fine, but it's really important to navigate, especially when it comes to God. You know, I think about the religious leaders. I think about the fact that they had their picture of Jesus, and he was right there in front of them, and yet they still sent him to death. Here's the reality. In the absence of our expectations, you and I will miss the presence of God. See, there's a reason why this is so important. Because whatever you're walking through in life right now, God is near and God is present. And if you and I are only staring at our picture, at our expectations of him, there's a really good chance that we might miss him, and he's right there in front of us. We're not that different than the religious leaders. I think about this as I talk to people, as I have conversations and I have coffee and I meet with people, whether they're about to get married or they're going through a challenging season of life at work or they're dealing with their kids. And as I hear over and over and over about their pictures of God, it sort of breaks down into three simple things. We look at God so often and we frame up a way that he's supposed to work. We commit to memory, this picture that he's supposed to do things my way. Come on, isn't that true? We have expectations that God is going to do things my way. By 27, I'm going to have this. By 33, I'm going to live in this house. And by 40, I'm going to be the president of X. That's my way, right? We also, coincidentally, we have an expectation of God that he's going to do things in my timing. Not only are you going to do things my way, God, I expect you to do it according to my timing. And while you're at it, why don't you go ahead and throw in my preferred outcomes? I mean, does that scratch the surface or connect at all with your picture of God? We don't really talk about this sort of stuff, do we? We don't really bring this up in small group because it sort of frames us up as a little bit ugly, maybe a little bit entitled, maybe a little bit unrealistic, but the reality is, deep down inside, we have a picture of God. And unless we take an inventory of it and check on it every once in a while, we may very well miss the Messiah, and he's right there next to us. You know what I love about Jesus? I love that he was human. I love that he was like us. Like he felt what we felt. He walked the earth. He had emotions. He had pain. He experienced temptations. And this whole fine line between desires and expectations, he had to navigate it too. He understood and found a way to not allow his desires to become expectations. You see, out of everything that I'm learning from this passage of Scripture about the religious leaders, it's that phrase right there. When our desires become expectations, trouble is near. So Jesus knew how to guard his heart. He walked and experienced what we did, but he took it a step further. In the hours before, he had this moment with the high council in this trial period where, they sentenced him to blasphemy, right? This like acting irreverent about God or claiming to be the God, right? They sentenced him to death. In the hours before that, he had an intimate moment in prayer. He had a moment with God the Father where he took time to dig deep, to find out what his picture was starting to form up for his own Father. In Mark 14, verse 35 through 36, here's what it says. This is Jesus in prayer. And going a little further, he fell on the ground and he prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. Did you catch that right there? He said, God, Daddy, I desire a different way. If it's possible, can we skip the cross? Does it have to involve death? Jesus had desires. Jesus had the starting formation of a picture of how God was supposed to work. Jesus had a preferred way and a preferred timing and a preferred outcome, just like you and just like me, but he took it a step further. See, the way that we navigate this tension between desires and expectations is we reframe them by surrendering them to God. We have to reframe this picture in our hearts of God and make sure it's surrendered completely to God the Father. As you look at that scripture right there, this is from the ESV version, the English Standard Version. The version I remember as a kid, it included the word nevertheless. Some of you maybe learned the King James Version. You heard that as a kid. Instead of the word yet, when Jesus is praying, he said, take this cup from me, but nevertheless, not what I want, but what you want. Could it be possible that our expectations are actually the less? You know, the root of that phrase, nevertheless, actually means in spite of. So what Jesus was saying, God, here's what I want, here's what I desire. But in spite of all that, I surrender to your will. See, that's how we see the Father at work. No matter what we're going through, and no matter what picture we're carrying of God, if we are willing to reframe it like Jesus did, to surrender it to the Father with a little phrase called nevertheless, amazing things will happen. But if our desires become expectations, trouble is near. One of my favorite authors, Lisa Turkhurst, she said it this way. She said, what we stare at in life is what we will steer toward in life. So in the season of life you're in right now, are you staring at your expectations or are you staring at God? Because what you stare at is what you'll steer toward. There's a passage of scripture in Isaiah. Sadly, somehow, some way, it's become a bit of Christianese today. It's become the kind of verse that we sort of crochet and we put it up on our walls and our hallways and we look at it and like a good Notre Dame football player, we touch it before we go to work, right? It's this verse that's sort of just become, a little bit maybe watered down because we don't really give it the attention and the focus of our hearts. It's a verse written to the Israel nation, the nation of Israel, when they're going through a period of life where everything felt unsure. There was a lot of change, and they weren't sure where to turn, and they didn't know, where to go, and they just felt really, really uneasy. And here's what the prophet Isaiah spoke in chapter 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. He's talking about God. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Isn't that sobering? Doesn't that kind of wake you up about your picture of God? It does for me. It reminds me that I don't see it all, that my perspective is limited, that my idea of time and of good isn't God's idea of time and of good. You know what the difference between a leader and a follower is? It's not a title. It's perspective. The leader's out front. The leader's out ahead. The leader sees what the follower does not see. And the moment you and I fix our eyes on our expectations is the moment we become the very own leader of our lives rather than God. And we miss what he's doing for his kingdom. When desires become expectations, trouble is near. Are you willing to reframe your picture? Are you willing to take all that you dream of and want and desire and surrender it to the Father just like Jesus did? Almost 2 years ago in my life, as we were going through a challenging season, and we began what was a transition moment for us from our last church to this role and this position here at Northway. And I remember as we sensed God was leading us in a new direction, and it meant a change, and it meant moving, and it meant this thing. I went and I sat down and I drew up everything that I wanted. And I had a picture of my next role in my next church. And I had a title, and I had a couple lists of responsibilities, and I knew this is what it's going to look like. And I said, all right, God, let's see you go do your thing. Right? And I remember Kent Chevalier, the campus pastor here at the Wexford campus, he actually got in touch with me. I mean, coincidentally, I didn't know, I wasn't talking to him. He shot me something and he sent me a job description. And I remember looking at it, and I got in contact with our executive pastor here at Northway, Randy Blinko. And I remember we exchanged a couple of emails, and I remember I just said, you know what, that's not for me. That's not the role for me. I'm looking for something different. And I remember going, the next day and the day after that, and God started to tug on my heart, and he actually started to tug on my wife's heart, and we started to talk about it, and we actually started to pray. And as we started to pray and as we started to consider it, I started to realize what I had done. I had gotten way out ahead of God on that one. I had been focused so much on my picture that I almost missed what he wanted to do in my life. Do you see what I'm talking about? Do you see how subtle these expectations and these pictures are? And do you see how quickly they can cause us to miss the Father? As we prayed about it and as I surrendered this title and this idea and this set of responsibility, God brought my heart back to something I had written in my journal almost 3 years ago. And the dots connected directly to this idea of family matters and pastoring across the board for kids and for students. And I went and grabbed my laptop and I sent an email and I apologized to Randy Blinko, our executive pastor, for getting out ahead of God. And I humbly asked, hey, if you're still willing to talk to me, I'd love to come and check out Northway. And boy, am I glad I wrote that email. I'm so glad that his ways are different than my ways, because I could not imagine a better fit. My kids have transitioned so incredibly well, moving in the middle of a school year. My wife has made community and gotten connected here in the Pittsburgh region faster than she ever has in her life. I have felt at home from day one here at Northway. This has been a great place for our church, and our family to be together, and it happened so quickly, and I can't describe it as anything other than God. But I would have missed it. If my eyes would have been staring at my picture, I would have missed it. I would have steered my life in a very different direction. So I ask you again, what picture of God are you staring at? And are you willing to have a nevertheless moment before the Father? Desires cannot become expectations. I think right now, everybody listening in this moment, every single one of us is in a season of life, right? We're all going through something. Maybe you're in an amazing season of life. Maybe you're in what's called an average season of life. The amazing season of life is where everything goes your way. You got good financial news, you got good health, you got, great weather wherever you are. You feel like you should play the lottery tonight, right? It's just this amazing season, right? Everything is going your way. The average season is just kind of ho-hum, right? Where it's not too good, it's not too bad. And some of us are actually in an awful season where you're just dying for things to change. Maybe you got some news that's meant for someone else, right? Maybe relationships happened in a way that really weren't supposed to happen. Amazing, average, and awful season. But to me, no matter what season you're in, reframing your expectations is really, really important. Because if you're in an amazing season of life and if everything is going your way, you're forming a picture of God that could be dangerous. Because it's in those seasons where somehow, some way, we start to fall in love with the blessing and not the blesser. You know what I'm talking about? Like if we're not careful and if we're not willing in the great, amazing harvest seasons of life, if we're not willing to keep a guard around our expectations of God, we could fall in love with the blessing and not the blesser. And that's a devastating consequence because the amazing season does not last forever. If you're in an average season and things are just sort of ho-hum, this is a really critical time to reframe your expectations too. Because these are the seasons where we start to potentially believe a lie that God really doesn't care about you or me. That God's off paying attention to other people, and I'm going to have to take this ball and make it my own way. These are the seasons in the average moments where our expectations of God and our picture of Him, we start to get apathetic toward Him. And we start to die off from small group, or we start to come to church just a little bit less often because we've got to make it on our own, and that's a lie. Because God is at work in that season too. And if we are willing to say nevertheless and reframe our expectations, we will see Him and we can join Him. And if you're in an awful season, the kind where you just wish you could snap your fingers and get out of, this is a time in your life where you need hope. And this is a time in your life where you need to cling with both hands to an eternal perspective. And if you're not careful, and if I'm not careful in those seasons, my expectations will begin to lead me to believe that earth is my final place, that this is my home, and that's just not true. When I think eternally, and when I know that heaven is coming, and that there's a story coming even after this life ends, my hope picks up somehow, some way, and I start to see God at work. No matter what season you're in, this is a prayer worth praying. Jesus Himself prayed it. I hope you'll join me in this effort to reframe my expectations and live on the desire side and see what God's up to. Would you bow your heads with me as I close our time in prayer? Heavenly Father, I thank You right now for the book of Mark. And God, I thank You for showing us the religious leaders. God, I know that might sound just a little bit weird, but I can be a lot like them. God, thanks for giving us a picture in Mark 14 of the danger of having wrong expectations of God. God, I ask for courage for everyone. Courage to take a bold step and confess what we desire. And even go further and reframe by surrendering to You and asking for Your will to come true in our lives, God. Because we don't want to miss You at work. God, I know You're very near to us right now. Your word promises us that. So please give us eyes to see it. And may that moment be filled with hope as we see You at work right there next to us in our life, no matter what season we're in. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.